Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. In this video, I'll be reading an excerpt from Horizon, the magazine of useful and intelligent living, August 1941, by Manly P. Hall. Atlantis and the Origins of Civilization. Someday we will know that 25,000 years ago on this earth dwelt human beings of great culture who governed according to the laws of rational democracies. In a world troubled with imminent problems, full fascination remains in the theme of the sunken continent of Atlantis. Atlantis is still a word to conjure with, and it is not because people have read Plato. The word seems to have a connotation strange and mysterious, conveying to many individuals something of what they were a part of in some past time. But many think of Atlantis incorrectly. It was not a continent, but a distribution of land. It was the whole map in a different pattern from the pattern it is in today. The distribution lay in America, in Africa, Asia, and China, all over the earth. Atlantis was not a particular area in one place on the earth's surface. Atlantean remains may be found anywhere. Atlantis was a period, not a place. Atlantis disappeared gradually. The geodetic and geographic changes which caused some areas to sink and other areas to rise occupied a period of millions of years. Even what we call Aryans of our modern world came out of a distribution involving all the lands from South America to Africa and from Europe to China. So was Atlantis an arrangement of a continent, part of an arrangement that is still changing, that will continue to change until the end of the earth. There will never be a time of change ceasing. Geography's modifying force has been the rotation of the earth on its axes, which cause areas of land to move consistently, soft land crumbling up against hard land, and this change will someday result in the loss of the continent we know and evolve from our world other continents. The rate of change is slow. Map readjustments would not be apparent to people in one lifetime, but there are symptoms to be observed, and one of these is climate change. It is obvious that the temperature of various locations is changing. New England no longer has the snowbound winters of 50 years ago. New York now has snow flurries in the months when, in an earlier period, the countryside was solidly snow-covered. We know too that there is dry land today in areas in Texas which in the 16th and 17th centuries were under the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. We have other areas which have been above water since 1900 BC, others which were underwater for billions of years. There are seashells on the top of Mount Blanc, other seashells on the highest point reached on the Himalaya mountains. The search for Atlantis is not solely a search under the ocean, nor is it confined to the great areas in China and India and certain parts of Europe. Here in our own country we can find Atlantis. It should be thought of as a great kingdom or empire, a world power that traded and dealt with other nations. The mercantile of the age was not so inferior to our own ships, though powered differently, journeyed to the most distant areas, despite beliefs to the contrary. That no one knew the earth was round up to the time of Columbus is one of the myths of history, like the story of Columbus making the egg stand on end. Columbus in fact had opportunity to read that our world was round, and he might have read of its diameter and circumference. He may not have, but he could have. Nor was the coming of the Vikings to America the beginning of the exploration of the New World. We know the Greeks were here long before them and sailed up the St. Lawrence River, according to Plutarch. They navigated the north coast of New England, penetrated inland as far as the Great Lakes, and the record of their discovery of this continent was established in Greece 1,500 years prior to Columbus's famed visit. As to the lost continent of Atlantis and its approximate location, the Chinese knew of it, and the Greeks, and the Hindus. Fiji Islanders, acknowledging that they have participated in the catastrophe, have preserved a complete record of the destruction of Atlantis. The Indians of Madagascar have their stories of the cataclysms and changes, which produced the Atlantean deluge, and records have been preserved among the American Indians Because the cataclysm affected an enormous area, all peoples of antiquity knew of it. Certainly in some mysterious way, this cataclysm took place. In efforts and attempts made to explain the relationship between the geological discoveries of modern science and the continental distribution according to the Oriental mystic. The one thing determined with reasonable certainty is that the last glacial sweep was later than the Atlantean continent. Land distribution was largely in its present shape in the glacial period, but the island of Poseidon had not then sunk. Poseidon, almost as large as Australia, sank in a single night, according to the old myths, carrying with it 60 million people. And this was the end of the Atlantean continent. The sinking of that area, which resulted in our present land distribution, must have caused terrific ocean agitation. The Atlantic Ocean cutting up no end, with resultant floods in Europe and South America and Africa. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755 caused the waves to go around the world 11 times before they died out, and Lisbon's cataclysm was nothing compared to the sinking of the island of Poseidon. It appears that there was some realization of the impending catastrophe, for a large part of the Atlantis population had left the island of Poseidon and gone to the continental mainland. The mainlanders continuing to thrive interest us, for they have survived up to the present time. As an instance, the populating of America has always been a great scientific riddle. Mongolians are supposed to have come across from Asia by the Bering Strait and into British Columbia and down through the United States to Central and South America. This theory of an enormous migration has in it little of significance or sense. Of great import, on the other hand, is the significance to be attached to the uncovering of remnants of Atlantis in areas not generally supposed to contain these remnants. California from San Francisco south and into Mexico is an area which was up during the Atlantean period. Hundreds of discoveries of very ancient remnants have been uncovered in careful excavations that have extended from California to Arizona and New Mexico. Africa, another area up during the Atlantean period, had remained one of the most mysterious continents on Earth. Explorers plot over it and go across it, but little has been done in scientific exploration of African records, which go back to inconceivable antiquity. The African we hear about is a native, dancing with his spear and covering shield, but in Central America, only a few years ago, 2 explorers discovered what they believed to be the remains of a great city. This city would compare favorably in size with some of the ancient cities of Central America. It must have had a population of 2 or 3 million. This was no mass of native huts, but a great city of carved stone, a city that could not have been built by aborigines. It was a city architecturally planned and in one of the most inaccessible areas in Africa. There is no possible doubt that it is an Atlantean city. The Atlantis records of Central Africa we now know are not feats of memory carried along by aborigines, but are the concern of an elaborate priesthood, one with which our missionaries have had little success. A priesthood that celebrates mystical rites, has a profound knowledge of magic, and is capable of producing mysterious phenomena that every explorer confronts and every scientist denies, and denials that have nothing to do with the elements of the fact. No utterly primitive people could evolve this knowledge. It was derived from somewhere. It had to come from a legitimate origin. Interestingly, it is magic and shamanism identical with that of the American Indian. It is a fair assumption that at some remote period there was a wide distribution of knowledge, since hopelessly lost in the mysteries of time. This knowledge was not original. It was carried from somewhere else, but where are the records? If it was only 15,000 years ago or less when the great Atlantean continent sank, why not more elaborate literary remains? Records should have been uncovered sufficient and explicit on the history of these ancient people. Why, without exception, do ancient civilized nations retire into a darkness to emerge already civilized, but leaving no record? Egypt emerged civilized 7,000 years ago. No one has any records of how Egypt came to be great, not even the record of where the Egyptian language evolved. could be found by the great Egyptian authority, Maspero. The great civilization of Egypt stands, but no one knows where it came from. There is no record of primitive Egypt. The same goes for Greece. Greece emerges already capable of philosophy and art without record of a barbaric period. India emerges historically with a language with sacred books. No one knows where India got them. Out of vacuums in history, nations emerge with their knowledge thoroughly established. When was the curtain drawn across the origin of nations? Was it 10,000 BC? Beyond this, there is no history. Are we to conceive all civilizations emerged with their knowledge at approximately the same time, already to become great civilized powers? It is like picking up an adult without a childhood, coming out of nowhere ready to vote, without family to trace nor place to come from. How can he be accepted, just emerging and saying with a theatrical bow, "Here I am"? Something about it doesn't sound right. We established first thinking man at a period of gnawing at a bone and throwing a stone axe. Not so long after man wrote the classics. Where's the sense of that? And when did this transition take place? Back 25,000 years ago? Even 50,000 years ago? There were great artists. Their jumping elephants on cave walls would paralyze the modern artist. They could not have been barbarians. Yet when we pick them up again, they are killing mastodons with stones. Once more they disappear to come out as philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle. You would think that there would be a period in the life of a people that would be remembered, and that is the period of discovery. Somewhere in the interval between Stone Age and moderns, man discovered 2 times 2 makes 4. As a discovery, it should have been preserved, but it isn't. The origin of writing, the evolution of ideographic pictures is lost. The origin of language is lost. We do not know where grammar comes in. We have Egyptian hieroglyphs, then grammar, some jump, with a people suddenly becoming very intelligent. The only evidence that we have that this knowledge was carried from somewhere else is in the legends and myths that do not calculate in time of things happening, but tell of the fathers who came from far across the water with teachings and wisdom. So what of the possibility that while the Neanderthal man was wandering around and the Heidelberg jaw still had its owner, through the period of long heads, flat heads, and square heads, that these represented merely primitive races, abiding as contemporaries of more highly evolved people? That nations were civilized by outsiders, and that is the reason we cannot trace civilization in them, seems possible and reasonable. Not so long ago, 2 skulls were discovered. They were over 1 million years old. Instead of being flat heads as Mongolians are, the brain capacity is as good as we have today. That was a blow. Science has supposed skulls of that period to be very large in front and small behind, organized solely for grinding food between jaws, set like a bear trap. But here were 2 skulls delicately formed, highly evolved, and they were 1 million years old. That was an embarrassment. According to scientific rules, no one had much to say about it. A good general rule is, when you do not know anything, keep quiet. The scientific rule is keep it quiet. Skulls of highly evolved peoples 1 million years old pose a problem. Possible entrance any day into a new period of archaeology. Not every answer to the problem lines up simple, obvious, and straight. Suppose a couple of millions of years from now someone digs up Los Angeles, presuming it is not the capital of the world at that moment, and the digging happens to strike into the precise location of the Southwest Museum, turning up a collection of bones belonging to the creatures of the lava pits. They might decide we of today were contemporary with the saw-toothed tiger. The skeleton of a monkey might cause them to inquire what kind of people we were. Should they dig up a billboard and conclude we worshipped that? Then come upon a mummy case. Well, we were either Egyptian or very remarkable people, perhaps both. The whimsy is not far off from the story of the exploration in the Near East. Exploring archaeologists found 9 cities, one underneath another, and stopped digging only because funds gave out. There might be 15 cities underneath these. On a day when we will scratch deeper, we will not be satisfied with the tombs of Egyptian kings. The search downward will be for a substrate of high civilization, and the discovery that while a large part of ancient world was primitive, which is true also of today, a great civilization existed with peoples who disappeared from this earth 25,000 or 50,000 years ago. We are going to find out just that, for it is the only reasonable explanation to the origin of our arts and sciences. We may find what we seek in our own southwest, maybe in Mesopotamia, maybe we will have to dredge for it under the ocean. But we are going to find it. It is necessary to find it. It is no longer a hypothesis. It is necessary. That which is necessary will be manifested. And then we will know that 25,000 years ago on this earth dwelt human beings who could read and write, build cities, teach the sciences, tame and train animals for their use, build great monuments, write books, and govern according to the laws of rational democracies. And all the evidence we will find will justify all the legends and traditions which have came down to us with the gods who dwelt upon the earth in ancient times. Science is in for more headaches, such as the skeletons found of humans 20 feet tall, which because not understood is a discovery which has been hushed up. And there will be the matter of finding that all the old legends and traditions are based on history, that nothing is counterfeited, of which there has not been an original. Condensation from a public lecture. Suggested reading, Atlantis, and interpretation, and the mystery of electricity. Thank you for watching. There is much more information provided in the links below. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share.